I'm not sleeping on the floor. The words came out sharper than he'd intended, but Miles didn't take them back. The flight attendant had just delivered the news with that particular brand of apologetic stiffness that meant she'd already been yelled at twice tonight. The single sleeper suite on the Gulfstream G650ER had malfunctioned. The fold-out bed was stuck in a partially extended position, technically usable, but only for one person. Comfortably, at least. The woman standing opposite him in the narrow aisle didn't flinch at his tone. That was the first thing he noticed. She just stood there, one hand resting lightly on the overhead compartment, wearing the kind of quiet that made him feel like he'd announced something ridiculous instead of stating an obvious fact. "Of course you're not," she said. Her voice was low, unhurried. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, not annoyed, not amused, just watching. "You have a market-moving earnings call at 8 a.m. Pacific. I'd recognize that tie anywhere. It's the one your CFO was bragging about in the lounge, the Tom Ford he bought you for visibility." Miles's hand went instinctively to his collar. The silk was navy with a subtle geometric pattern, and yes, he'd worn it specifically because it photographed well on low-res video feeds. How the hell did she know about the tie? "His name's Derek," she continued, tilting her head slightly. "He has a tell. When he's nervous, he talks too loud. I was 2 gates over having terrible coffee, and I heard him explain your entire Q3 strategy to someone who was very clearly not on your payroll. So I know you can't afford to look like you slept in a ditch tomorrow." The flight attendant had retreated to the galley, clearly grateful to be removed from the crossfire. The plane hummed around them, a low mechanical thrum that seemed to amplify the silence between the two of them. Miles studied her. Dark hair, pulled back in a way that suggested function over fashion, though the effect was still striking. High cheekbones. A simple black sweater that probably cost more than it looked like it cost. No jewelry except a thin silver chain he couldn't quite see clearly in the dim cabin lights. She was maybe 30, maybe a little older. Hard to tell with someone who carried herself like she'd been in control of every room she'd ever entered. "Who are you?" he asked. "Lumi," she said. No last name. No explanation. "And you're Miles Chin. I've seen your face on enough billboards in Soho to recognize you anywhere, even without the tie. When the gate agent announced a last-minute equipment swap and I saw you coming down the jet bridge, I figured the universe had a sense of humor." The plane buffed slightly, nothing dramatic, just a reminder that they were somewhere over the Midwest, still climbing after the unscheduled stop in Chicago. The weather had been a nightmare all evening. Delays, cancellations, reroutes. Miles had been on his way back to San Francisco after a disastrous board meeting in New York, and the private charter he'd booked had been grounded due to mechanical issues, forcing him onto this shared flight. Shared. The word felt absurd now. This was a private aircraft, technically, but the charter company had overbooked the remaining slots to compensate for the commercial airline's cascade of cancellations. And now he was standing in the aisle with a woman who knew his CFO's nervous habits and his quarterly earnings timeline. "So you're a stalker or a strategist," he said, and despite everything, he felt the corner of his mouth twitch. "Depends on the hour." Her eyes flicked to the suite door behind him. "But right now, I'm someone who's been awake for 19 hours and would very much like to lie down. The problem is," she gestured vaguely between them, "we can't both fit. And I suspect we're both too stubborn to pretend otherwise." The plane banked slightly, and the overhead lights flickered. Outside the small porthole window, there was nothing but black and the occasional glint of distant city lights. Chicago was hours behind them. San Francisco was hours ahead. And in between, there was this, a luxury aircraft, one broken bed, and a woman who seemed to have already calculated every variable in the equation. Miles exhaled slowly. "You're right. I can't afford to look like hell tomorrow." But I also can't afford to be the guy who forces a woman to sleep on the floor because he's too important to share. I didn't ask you to share. I didn't offer. She laughed at that, a low, quiet sound that seemed to surprise even her. Okay. That's fair. She stepped past him, brushing close enough that he caught a faint trace of something floral. Not perfume, maybe just shampoo. She opened the suite door and peered inside, studying the partially extended bed with the clinical precision of someone assessing a piece of real estate. The mattress is a queen, she said, pulling out her phone and shining the light into the space. The mechanism's jammed about 18 inches from full extension. If we position ourselves head to foot, we could both fit. Barely. But we'd need a physical barrier. Something to establish boundaries. She turned back to face him, and something in her expression shifted. A flicker of mischief, maybe. Or just exhaustion, finally showing through the polished surface. I have a magazine, she said. The latest issue of Art Forum. Would that meet your standards for a gentleman's agreement? 2 hours earlier, JFK Airport Lumi had been watching him since the moment he walked into the private terminal. Not because she wanted to, she'd been trained to observe, and old habits didn't disappear just because the assignment had ended. But there was something about the way he moved through the crowd that made her look twice. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He had that particular kind of exhaustion that came from too many meetings and not enough coffee, the kind that made a man look older than he was. He was probably 35, maybe 36. The kind of handsome that would have been intimidating if he hadn't looked so damn tired. She'd watched him argue on the phone for 10 minutes before boarding, something about a contract, something about expectations. His voice had been controlled, professional, but there was tension in his jaw that told her he was barely holding it together. Then he'd hung up, taken a breath, and smoothed his expression into something acceptable for public consumption. That was the moment she decided she liked him. Or at least, that she didn't dislike him. It was a small thing, the way he collected himself before stepping into the world. But it told her he cared about how he showed up for people. The phone in her pocket buzzed. She ignored it. She already knew what it would say. Rex's people had been texting her for the past hour, confirming details, checking her timeline. She was supposed to be on this flight for a reason, and it wasn't the art auction in San Francisco that she'd claimed as her cover. She was supposed to find the file. The encrypted tablet Miles carried in his bag, the one with the entire confidential buyout strategy for a small game studio that Rex's firm had been trying to acquire for months. She had 2 days to access it, copy it, and deliver it to her handler. This was supposed to be her last job, the one that paid enough to walk away clean. But she'd been in this business long enough to know that last jobs never went the way they were supposed to. The phone buzzed again. Still, she didn't look. I don't know what's more concerning, Miles said, accepting the magazine from her, the fact that you're traveling with a copy of Art Forum in 2026, or the fact that you're using it as a peacekeeping instrument. Lumi stepped into the suite, moving with an economy of motion that suggested she'd navigated smaller spaces before. The magazine is for research. I'm a private art consultant. I spend my life trying to convince billionaires that they should spend money on things they don't understand. Ah. He followed her inside, noticing the way she immediately assessed the space, the position of the pillows, the angle of the blankets, the limited options for positioning. So you're a professional translator for the aesthetically illiterate. Something like that. She was already pulling off her shoes, setting them neatly beside the door. I also do acquisition negotiation and collection curation. But mostly, I'm the person who tells a hedge fund manager that the Jackson Pollock he just bought for his wife's birthday is actually a forgery, and yes, he should be embarrassed. Miles laughed, a genuine laugh, not the practiced one he used in meetings. It surprised him. He couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed on a business trip. That sounds like a good way to make enemies. It's a good way to make clients, she said, settling onto the bed at the far end. If they're smart enough to be grateful. If they're not, she shrugged, I don't need their money anyway. She was looking at him again. That patient, measuring gaze that made him feel like she could see right through his carefully constructed exterior. He was used to people looking at him, he was a CEO, after all. People looked at him all the time, trying to figure out what he was thinking, how to leverage his attention, whether he was worth their time. But this was different. She wasn't trying to take anything from him. She was just observing. You should take the top position, she said, gesturing to the head of the bed. Your suit will get less wrinkled. And I promise I won't kick you in the face. I appreciate that. He loosened his tie and draped it over the single chair in the corner, then realized he had no idea what to do with his jacket. This was not a situation he had any script for. He'd been on thousands of business trips, first-class cabins, private charters, five-star hotels. He knew how to handle boardrooms and negotiating tables and surprise board meetings. But this, a cramped suite, a broken bed, a woman he'd met 15 minutes ago, this was entirely new. Just leave it, Lumi said, apparently reading his hesitation. Nothing here is going to judge you. I promise. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding and hung his jacket on the chair anyway, because some habits were too ingrained to break. Then he slid onto the opposite end of the bed, careful to keep his feet from encroaching on her side of the mattress. She held up the magazine like a shield. I'm going to set this up as a visual barrier. It's not a wall, but it's a symbol. We each stay on our side. We don't touch. We don't talk about anything that will make this more awkward than it already is. And if one of us violates the terms? He was surprised to hear the teasing note in his own voice. She raised an eyebrow. Then the other person has full permission to use the magazine as a weapon. The articles in this issue are very thick. He was still laughing as she propped the magazine between them, creating a literal wall between their faces. It was absurd. It was ridiculous. It was the most unbusinesslike interaction he'd had in years. And for the first time since he'd boarded the plane, he didn't think about his Q3 earnings or his board's expectations or the fact that his CFO had a loud mouth. He just lay there, in the dark, feeling the thrum of the plane around him, and listened to the sound of someone breathing softly on the other side of the page. The turbulence came 3 hours later. Miles had been drifting, not quite asleep but not fully conscious either, that strange liminal space where thoughts became half-formed images and time lost its meaning. The magazine was still propped between them, though it had shifted slightly, no longer a perfect barrier but a suggestive one. He could see the corner of Lumi's shoulder in the dim light from the porthole, the way her chest rose and fell with even breaths. Then the plane dropped. It wasn't the usual bumpy weather turbulence. This was sudden, violent, the kind of lurch that made his stomach pitch into his throat. The magazine toppled. He heard Lumi make a small sound of surprise as the plane banked sharply, and then his feet were sliding into her side of the bed because there was nothing to hold onto, no seatbelt. No, sorry, he said, the word coming out breathless as he scrambled to reorient himself. Sorry, I didn't mean, it's fine. She was already sitting up, her hair disheveled, her eyes dark in the faint light. Everyone okay? The plane steadied. Through the window, he could see lightning flashing in the distance, a storm system they'd apparently been skirting that had decided to get closer. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, professionally calm, apologies for the turbulence, folks. We're adjusting altitude and should have smooth air in about 20 minutes. 20 minutes. In a bed with a woman he didn't know, with all pretense of a physical barrier gone. He lay still, hyper-aware of the space between them. Her feet were near his shoulder now, not touching, but close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her body. She had shifted to sit with her back against the wall, and in the dim light, he could see her watching him again. "Really," she said, "it's fine. This is not the worst place I've ever spent a night." "Where's the worst?" He hadn't meant to ask. It was just that the darkness made the usual social barriers feel less relevant. She was a stranger, sure, but in these circumstances, with the plane pitching around them and the magazine lying crumpled on the floor, she was also the only other person in the world. She considered the question for a moment. A storage closet in a mansion on the Upper East Side. I was supposed to be cataloging a collection of Chinese porcelain, and the door locked behind me. I was stuck for 4 hours before the housekeeper found me. Miles stared at her. "You didn't call anyone?" "I didn't have my phone. I'd left it in the car." She smiled, barely visible in the dark. "I spent the time memorizing the inventory list. That's how I became the expert on that collection." Sometimes disasters are just opportunities in disguise. That's a very generous way of looking at it. It's a practical way of looking at it. She stretched her legs out slowly, careful not to touch him. "I learned a long time ago that there are 2 ways to respond when things go wrong: panic or adapt. Panic never helped anyone. Adaptation, at least, keeps you alive." He stared at the ceiling, thinking about that. "I've spent the last 6 months panicking," he said, surprising himself. "I just didn't realize it until now." "About the game launch?" He turned to look at her, startled. "How did you know I was in gaming?" "Because I read the financial news." She said it simply, without apology. "And because you've mentioned it 3 times since we boarded. Twice on the phone, once to the flight attendant." She paused. "You're nervous." "That's okay. Being nervous means you care." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he laughed again, low and rueful. "Is there anything you don't notice?" "Lots of things," she said. "I just have good observational skills. It comes with the job." "What job, exactly?" "Art consultant is a very broad description." She was quiet for a moment, and he could feel her weighing the question. When she spoke, her voice was careful, measured. "I help people understand each other. In a way, that's all I do. I look at the things they've collected, the art they've chosen to surround themselves with, and I tell them what it means. Not what they think it means. What it actually means." "That sounds invasive." "It is." She said it without shame. "But most people don't know what they actually want. They know what they're supposed to want: the prestigious pieces, the investment-grade acquisitions, the things that will impress their peers. But they don't know what speaks to them. That's what I'm there for. To find the thing they didn't know they needed." Miles thought about his own apartment. The minimalist furniture, the carefully curated modern art. He'd hired a consultant to help him choose it all, and he'd loved the result, but now he wondered if he actually loved it, or if he just loved the idea of what it said about him. "What would you see in my collection?" he asked. She was silent for a moment. "Then, I'd see a man who's trying very hard to prove something. Probably to himself more than to anyone else. You have expensive taste, but there's no warmth. No risk. Everything is carefully chosen to say something specific, successful, sophisticated, in control. But nothing that says this is who I actually am." He should have been offended. Instead, he felt something unclench in his chest. "Is that your professional diagnosis?" "No," she said softly. That's just what I see. I don't know you yet. I just know the collection. Yet. The word hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. I don't have a collection, he heard himself say. I have a job. That's not the same thing. What do you collect, then? He thought about it. Memories, I guess. But I don't really have time for that anymore. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she shifted on the bed, and he realized she'd moved closer, not much, just an inch or two. But in the small space of the suite, it felt significant. Tell me one, she said. What? A memory. Something you've kept. He should have said no. He should have made a joke, deflected, changed the subject. But the plane was quiet now, the turbulence fading, and in the darkness, with her voice soft and curious, he found himself wanting to answer. When I was 12, he said slowly, I built a tree house. Not one of those elaborate things with electricity and furniture. Just a platform and an old oak tree in my backyard. I'd spend hours up there, reading comic books, thinking about nothing. My dad used to bring me sandwiches and coffee, even though I was probably too young for coffee. He'd sit on the ground below and just be there. We didn't talk much. We didn't have to. What happened to it? It got old. The wood rotted. I went away to boarding school and forgot about it. He paused. I think about it sometimes, though. Not the tree house itself. The way it felt to have someone just be there, without wanting anything from me. The words hung in the air between them. Outside the porthole, the storm had passed, and the first gray light of dawn was beginning to seep through the clouds. I think that's the most honest thing anyone's told me in years, Lumi said quietly. He turned to look at her, and in the growing light, he saw something in her face he hadn't seen before. Not calculation. Not observation. Something closer to tenderness. You ask a lot of questions, he said. You answer a lot of them. The moment stretched between them, fragile and electric. He could feel the warmth of her body from a few inches away. He could smell that faint floral scent again, which was definitely shampoo, and something underneath it that was just her. The plane hummed around them, and for a moment, the rest of the world, the board meetings, the earnings calls, the weight of expectation, felt impossibly far away. Then the sun broke through the clouds, flooding the cabin with amber light, and Lumi sat up, blinking in the sudden brightness. Well, she said, her voice carefully neutral. That was the most interesting overnight flight I've ever taken. They landed 40 minutes later. The plane taxied toward the private terminal at San Francisco Airport, and Miles found himself dreading the moment when they'd step off the aircraft and return to their separate lives. Lumi had been quiet for the last hour, scrolling through something on her phone. He'd pretended to sleep, but he'd been watching her in the reflection of the porthole, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the way she bit her lip when she was reading something that required focus. He wanted to ask her number. He wanted to ask her out, to dinner, to anything that would extend this strange, unexpected connection. But she was a stranger. A smart, observant, beautiful stranger who'd managed to make him feel more seen in one night than most people did in years. You know, he said as the plane rolled to a stop, we never finished our conversation. Which one? She was pulling on her shoes, not looking at him. The one about collections. I never asked what you collect. She paused, one hand on her shoe. Then she looked up, and her smile was small, a little sad. I collect moments, she said. The ones that feel like they matter. I don't keep them anywhere physical. They just live in my head. Like this one? She was quiet for a moment. Then, maybe. The door opened, and the morning air rushed in, cold, clean, smelling faintly of jet fuel. Outside, the California sun was blazing, and Miles could see his car idling on the tarmac, waiting to take him to his hotel, his meeting, his carefully scheduled day. Lumi stood, brushing off her sweater. She was a little rumpled from the night, and there was a line on her cheek from where she'd pressed against the pillow. She was still beautiful. He opened his mouth to say something, anything, but she spoke first. "Good luck with your call today," she said. "For what it's worth, I think you'll do fine. You care. That's more than most people in your position can say." Then she walked past him, down the steps, into the sunlight, and was swallowed by the day. He saw her again that night. The celebration was at a private venue in the Mission, a converted warehouse that Miles's marketing team had transformed into an immersive experience for the new game launch. The critics were there, the investors were there, and yes, the ex-girlfriend was there, because she had investments to protect and grudges to nurse. He didn't think Lumi would come. He'd given her the invitation on impulse, an awkward stumble of words that made him feel like a teenager again. "I'm having a thing tonight. It's going to be boring, but there'll be good whiskey. You should come. If you want. No pressure." She'd said yes. Just a single word, delivered with that warm, teasing smile of hers. Yes. And now she was here. He saw her across the room, and something in his chest loosened. She was wearing a simple black dress and minimal jewelry, the same silver chain he noticed on the plane, and she was talking to one of the junior developers with the kind of focused attention that made people feel like they were the most interesting person in the world. He was crossing the room toward her when the first investor cornered him. "Miles. The graphics are stunning, truly. But I'm concerned about the emotional engagement. How do we make players feel connected to the characters?" He was in the middle of a carefully prepared answer when Lumi appeared at his elbow, a glass of whiskey in her hand. "May I?" she asked, her voice low and smooth. He nodded, grateful for the interruption. She turned to the investor and smiled. "The graphics aren't designed to overwhelm. They're meant to seduce. When a player enters this world, they should feel like they're revisiting a memory, something half-forgotten, something that lives in the corners of their mind. That's where emotional engagement lives. In the liminal space between recognition and surprise." The investor blinked. Then he nodded slowly. That's actually very helpful. Are you on the team?" "She's a consultant," Miles said. "An exceptionally good one." The investor wandered off, looking thoughtful. Miles turned to Lumi. "Where did that come from?" "I read the background materials," she said simply. "You sent a press kit to your investors. I found a copy in your bag." "Did you go through my bag?" "I was looking for a pen." She smiled, unrepentant. "I'm a consultant. Research is what I do." He was still laughing when he saw Chloe approaching. Chloe was his ex-girlfriend. They dated for a year, broken up 6 months ago, and she'd managed to make his life difficult ever since. She was a venture capitalist with a taste for drama, and she'd invested in the game company not because she believed in it, but because she wanted to remind him that she still had power over him. "Miles," she said, her smile sharp as glass. "Congratulations on the launch. The graphics are lovely." "They are," he said, and he was genuinely proud of them, which made him sound less defensive than he might have otherwise. Chloe's eyes flicked to Lumi. "And you must be the consultant I've heard about. It's so nice to meet you." Lumi smiled, that warm, patient smile he was beginning to recognize. "Thank you. I've heard a lot about you too. All good things, I hope. Miles mentioned you were an early investor." That's very generous of you. Lumi's voice was perfectly neutral, but Miles could hear the subtext. I know what you are, and I'm not threatened. Chloe's smile tightened. It's a good investment. Not all of them work out, but this one seems to have legs. She turned to Miles, her eyes glittering. I just hope you're not making the same mistakes you usually make. So impulsive. So focused on the shiny things. It was a knife, delivered with surgical precision. Chloe knew exactly which buttons to push, the ones about his decision-making, his judgment, his ex-girlfriend who'd called him emotionally unavailable when she'd left him for a tech billionaire. Miles felt heat rise to his face. Chloe, but Lumi was already speaking. She had that patient, amused expression again, the one that made people feel like they were being seen. I read somewhere, Lumi said, her voice light and conversational, that people who criticize others for being impulsive are usually projecting their own fears about losing control. But I'm sure that's not relevant here. Chloe's mouth opened, then closed. Lumi turned to Miles, her expression suddenly bright. I have to say, the art direction on the new level is inspired. The color palette alone deserves an award. She was giving him an out. A gift. I'm glad you think so, he said, taking it. Chloe made an excuse about needing another drink and walked away. Miles watched her go, feeling something like relief mixed with something like triumph. That was unexpected, he said. Lumi shrugged, the picture of innocence. What was? I just complimented your art direction. You know what you did. I know I recognized an energy vampire and refused to engage. She took a sip of her whiskey. That's not manipulation. That's self-preservation. He looked at her, really looked at her, and felt something shift in his chest. Not admiration, that had been there since the plane. Something deeper. The kind of thing that made him want to know everything about her. Thank you, he said quietly. She met his eyes. You don't have to thank me. I didn't do it for you. I did it because she was being rude, and I have a low tolerance for rudeness. Still. He held her gaze. You didn't have to do that. No, she agreed. But I wanted to. They left the party together, ducking out through a side door while the crowd was still occupied with the performance art installation that Lumi had, apparently, accurately predicted no one would understand. The night air hit Miles's face, cool and damp. A fine mist was falling, not enough to be called rain, but enough to make the streetlights glow with halos of light. I thought you'd be staying until the end, he said. I saw what I needed to see. She was walking beside him, her heels clicking on the pavement. The launch will be successful. Your investor anxiety was mostly performative. And Chloe will spend the next 6 months regretting that she didn't invest more. Everything else is detail. He laughed. You're terrifying. I know. She smiled up at him. Is that a problem? He considered the question. No. It's actually kind of refreshing. They walked in silence for a block, the mist settling on their shoulders. He wasn't sure where they were going, he just started walking, and she'd followed, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. Where are you staying? He asked. A hotel near the park. I'm leaving tomorrow morning. Something cold settled in his stomach. Not the mist. Something else. Early? 10. There's a flight. She said it matter-of-factly, as if leaving was the obvious next step. He stopped walking. She stopped too, turning to face him. I want to see you again, he said. The words came out more direct than he'd intended, but he didn't regret them. She was quiet for a moment, studying his face as if she was trying to read something in it. Why? Because he gestured between them, this didn't feel like a one-night thing. It felt like a beginning. She smiled, but there was something sad in it. You don't know me, Miles. You know the version of me that I let you see. That's not the same thing. Then let me see the rest. She looked away, toward the street, the mist, the city. I'm not good at this. At letting people in. It's a skill I never learned. Neither did I. I'm learning now. He stepped closer. I don't know what this is. I just know I want to find out. She turned back to him, and in the glow of the streetlight, he saw something that made his breath catch. Something raw and real, stripped of the polish she carried like armor. I'm not who you think I am, she said quietly. Then tell me who you are. She was silent for a long moment. The mist settled on her hair, her shoulders, her eyelashes. I was hired to get information from you, she said. The game studio you're acquiring? My firm represents a competitor. I was supposed to find your valuation notes, your negotiation strategy. I was supposed to deliver them. The words landed like a blow. Miles felt his chest tighten, his body tensing with instinctive betrayal. I knew there was something, he said, his voice flat. The questions. The research. The way you knew everything about my situation. I didn't tell you because I was ashamed, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. And then, somewhere between the magazine and the turbulence and the conversation about collections, I realized I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to be the person who takes something from you. I just wanted to be the person who knows you. Lumi, I quit the job. I called my handler from the terminal and told him I couldn't do it. She looked up at him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I don't expect you to believe me. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know. Because you deserve the truth, even if it costs me everything. He should have walked away. He should have called security, made a scene, protected himself from the woman who'd admitted to being a threat. That was the sensible thing to do. The safe thing. But Miles had never been particularly good at doing the safe thing. He stepped into the rain, the cold mist soaking through his shirt. Lumi stood in the doorway of the building, watching him with the kind of vulnerability that made him want to protect her from the world. You're an idiot, he said quietly. You had everything to gain by taking that information. Everything to lose by telling me. I know. Why did you tell me? She met his eyes. Because I'd rather lose this than lie to you. Because I'd rather be the person I was on that plane than the person I am in my job. Because I want you to look at me the way you looked at me when you told me about your treehouse. The words hung in the air between them. Then let's start over, he said. I'm Miles. I'm a game developer. I built a treehouse once, but I think I forgot how to be the person who wants to sit in one. She laughed, a wet, watery sound that was half sob, half relief. I'm Lumi. I have a tendency to tell people things they don't want to hear. I'd rather hear the truth. He stepped closer, close enough to see the raindrops on her cheeks. Even if it's hard. Especially then. Just like that? She asked. You believe me? I believe what happened on that plane. He reached out and brushed a strand of wet hair from her face. I believe you didn't have to tell me any of that. And I believe you want to be better than the thing you were hired to do. She closed her eyes, and when she opened them, there was something new in them. Something like hope. So now what? She asked. He smiled. Now I show you my game. The rain wasn't mist anymore. It was real rain now, coming down in sheets, soaking them both. You're going to show me your game in the rain? She said, laughing. I'm going to show you my game, period. He took her hand, felt her fingers lace through his. It's about a character who has to choose between doing what she was told and doing what's right. I think you'll understand it. She squeezed his hand. I think I will too. The studio was empty when they got there. The night shift had gone home, and the morning shift wasn't due for hours. The only light came from the monitors, casting blue-white glow across the rows of empty desks. This is where I spend most of my time, Miles said, leading her through the space. When I'm not on planes, anyway. It's beautiful. Lumi was looking at the concept art on the walls, the sketches of characters and landscapes. You made all this? We made all this. He gestured vaguely. The team. I just oversaw things. You're being modest. I'm being accurate. He led her to a small room at the back, a private space with leather chairs and a massive monitor. This is where I test builds. He sat her down in one of the chairs and brought up the game. The screen came alive with color, a rain-soaked city street, neon lights reflecting in puddles, a single figure standing on a rooftop. This is the level I told you about, he said. The one about choosing. The player has to decide whether to trust someone who might be lying to them. Lumi watched the screen, her expression unreadable. That seems very personal. It's always personal. He sat beside her, close enough that his shoulder brushed hers. That's what makes it art. The character on the screen moved through the rain, across the rooftop, down a fire escape. The city stretched out below, endless and unlit. Do you know what happens? Lumi asked. I wrote it. He smiled. But it's more interesting to watch. I want to know what you think. She watched in silence as the character walked through the street, turning a corner, stepping into a doorway. Then the screen went black. That's where it stops for now, he said. The next level hasn't been finished yet. Lumi turned to look at him. In the glow of the monitor, her eyes were dark and shining. Show me the street again, she said. He pressed a button, and the image reappeared, the rain, the neon lights, the lonely figure on the rooftop. Does it remind you of anything? He asked. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, it looks like tonight. He looked at the screen, then back at her. That's what I thought. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to stop him. She didn't. Her eyes were steady on his, waiting. Their lips met softly. The rain was still falling outside, drumming against the window of his tiny private room, and the monitor cast a blue-gold glow across both of them. He felt her hand reach for his, felt her fingers lace through his own. Welcome to my world, he whispered against her lips. She pulled back slightly, her face flushed, her hair still damp. I think I've been here all along. The rain was falling harder now, a drumbeat against the glass. They were both soaked through, both shivering slightly in the cold air. Your apartment is nearby, he said. I should take you home before you get sick. She shook her head. This is where I want to be. He looked at her, this woman who'd appeared in his life like a gift, and felt something shift in his chest. Something permanent. Okay, he said softly. Then this is where we'll stay. He pulled her closer, and she settled against him, her head on his shoulder, her hands still in his. Outside, the city slept. the rain continued to fall. And in a small office in the heart of San Francisco, two people who'd found each other by accident discovered that some beginnings are worth more than any ending.
Subscribe to me for more content.